Great Plains. Anybody from the Plains? Southern states and Southerners on board. Southerners, where are you from, man? What means? Texas. You know, I heard the other day, unfortunately, about a famous Texan. I read it on the internet that Willie Nelson had been involved recently in a hit and run accident. Did you hear that? They say he was playing on the road. A mountain that used to exist here. This lake was not always here. There was a mountain that we now call Mount Mazama many thousands of years ago. Anybody know what the tallest mountain in Oregon is today? Those people, who's from Oregon? Somebody raised it. Now they don't want to raise their hands because they don't know. It is Mount Hood. Where are you from, sir? California, you know. So Mount Hood is the tallest mountain today, 11,200 some feet. It's a very beautiful and majestic mountain. But the mountain that was here before this lake existed was even bigger still. We now know it as Mount Mazama. That's a name that we've given it recently so we can tell the story. So Mount Mazama once existed over your left shoulder here. The summit would have been a mile above the lake surface that we're sailing on right now. It would have been the biggest mountain in what is now Oregon at somewhere between 12 and 13,000 feet. But it starts as a pretty inconsequential hill. This story is about 500,000 years long. So says our park geologist. Her name is Dr. Florence Ashen Thomas. And I'm serious. She's a hot little redhead. We call her Pyroclastic Flo. And she says that there were two tectonic plates involved, and still are. Have you heard about tectonic plates? Grinding against one another. Do you know what one tectonic plate said to the other tectonic plate just after the earthquake? It wasn't like the ash all the way around the mountain in depths of 400 and 500 feet, 70, 80 miles away. It's still several feet thick. Most of this goes to the north and east, because that's the prevailing wind, and it covers all the parts of 7 states. Most of Idaho gets covered, and it goes as far as Manitoba, Canada, in measurable amounts. This was the biggest volcanic eruption on the entire planet in the last 10,000 years. It was 100 times the magnitude of Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. 10 times bigger than Krakatoa, maybe 46 to 50 times the power of the San Francisco earthquake. According to our park volcanologist, his name is Professor Rocky Caldera. And he says that 15 cubic miles of material is ejected. That leaves a 15 cubic mile void under the mountain. The mountain simply collapses into that void like a piston falling back into a cylinder. And all of this takes only 8 to 12 hours. It's very rapid. So literally overnight, we go from the biggest mountain in what is now Oregon to a 4,000 foot deep smoking hole in the ground. And then the snows come and it continues to fill the caldera. And so now we have this beautiful and serene lake. Most of the statistical information I've gotten from some of the research by Dr. Caldera is that there's rocks and debris and even destruction has done a lot of the legwork on this. And so, imagine if you were one of the native people, if you lived to the north and east, you would have been killed either by the explosion, the eruption, or that your environment would have been devastated. It was thousands of years before anything grew, whether it was plant or animal, in that country. But if you lived to the west, maybe 50 miles away, you might have actually lived to tell the story. And I always find it fascinating to imagine if I were, or maybe you, lived in that environment as a hunter and gatherer, and every day you get up and you see this big mountain. It's kind of like your cornerstone, your north star in your environment. You're out hunting and gathering every day, but that gives you a focal point. And then one night you hear a boom, and the next morning an entire mountain is gone. It's absolutely not. I mean, how astounding would that have been? So there's been an amazing change here, and the change goes on, although it's such a slow process. This is not a dead volcano, but a dormant one. There's still heat beneath us. Someday there could be another mountain here if we give it enough time, but it's probably way beyond our life. The devil's back over this huge shark-fin-like shape that rising out of the caldera wall. It's a ridge that actually goes all the way to the top, as you can see, and then a secondary ridge to the right. This is also a product of volcanism, obviously, and a manifestation of change. This was once a void, a crack inside Mount Mazama when the mountain existed, and molten rock flowed into that crack, filling it up. Because the molten rock didn't reach the surface and wasn't exposed to the atmosphere, it cooled very slowly. And if it cools slowly, it gets really hard. So when Mount Mazama did erupt and collapse, the softer material fell away. This remained standing. This feature right next to the lake, about as tall as a 16-story building, maybe 50 feet wide at the bottom and 25, 30 feet wide at the top. And if you have a camera, and most of you do, as we get a little bit beyond it, I think it's a better picture because there's a beautiful contrast with the rock face on the left side being in shade while the rest of the caldera is highlighted. Well, we are in Skell Channel. You see that rock behind us, that giant big monolith back there that's known as Llao Rock, L-L-A-O? This is Skell Channel. Llao and Skell were gods in the Klamath pantheon of gods. They didn't name these places. Will Steele, the guy who made this a national park, he named all places around here. But he used those names because Klamath speaks of a great and grand and violent battle between those two gods. And the violence is what ultimately created Crater Lake. And that's where the name comes from. He also named Wizard Island. He thought it looked like a wizard castle. So that's where that name comes from. We get a little bit different perspective on Hillman Peak behind us, which is, like I said, the highest point on the rim. Hillman was the first European-American place. So we give him special place as the first European discoverer of Crater Lake.
William Steele, our park founder, started in 1885 to get this made to a national park. Never knew if it would happen or not. And 17 years later, finally, Congress passed it and Theodore Roosevelt signed the legislation to make Crater Lake a national park. And early on, he wanted to get some nice accommodation up on the rim, and say he wanted to get a higher class of visitor. Because imagine what those hardy pioneer types were like camping up there.
Orcasters, fishing ducks, seagulls. Every now and then a wayward pelican from Klamath Lake, white pelicans. Since you had Ranger Dave this morning, who's the king of puns, I had to go into about, I don't know if he talked about algae and fungus, lichen. The discoloration there, you know, not the white, but the green and the orange.
Ooh, a duck.
There's a duck there. Let's see what kind. It might be a merganser. So just taking off right there. I think we surprised it. So that discoloration is lichen, which means you're breathing pure, clear mountain air. And lichen is a combination of algae and fungus. Fungus provides moisture, algae is photosynthetic, it needs sun.